The myth that Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, upon being told that the starving peasants had no bread, said people accused of witchcraft, subjected to trials, and ultimately burned at the stake. But is it true? Not really. That sailing too far in one direction. Hi everyone, I'm James. Welcome to my channel. Today we're diving deep into the world of history, sometimes hazy, always fascinating. Specifically, we're tackling those historical myths we all learned as kids. So buckle up, it's going to be a rollercoaster ride as we debunk 7 widely misunderstood or misrepresented historical myths. Let's get started. Let's start with a story we all know. The story of George Washington and the cherry tree. Remember young George, little hatchet in hand, confessing to chopping down his father's prized cherry tree? It's a story meant to teach us about honesty and integrity. There's just one problem: it's not true. This tale, deeply embedded in American history, is as fictional as a unicorn riding a roller coaster. The culprit, one of Washington's biographers, Mason Locke Weems. He was more interested in crafting a compelling narrative than sticking to the historical record. Weems published his biographer 5 years after Washington's death in 1806 and fabricated the cherry tree story to illustrate Washington's unwavering morality. It's a good story, but a made-up one nonetheless. Our next historical myth takes us to pre-revolutionary France. The myth that Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, upon being told that the starving peasants had no bread, said, "Let them eat cake." Except Marie Antoinette never actually said those words. The phrase had been circulating in various forms for years, even before she set foot on French soil. One of the earliest appearances of this sentiment can be found in the autobiography of philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who attributed a similar phrase to a great princess. Let them eat cake is a classic case of misattribution, like a historical game of telephone where a phrase gets attached to the wrong person over time. In Marie Antoinette's case, it played into the hands of her political enemies who sought to paint her as a callous and out-of-touch ruler. Now, let's time travel to ancient Rome to the year 64 AD, when a great fire engulfed the city for 6 days and nights. This devastating event left much of the city in ruins, thousands of residents homeless, and caused widespread panic and chaos. Legend has it that while Rome burned, Emperor Nero callously played the fiddle, indifferent to the suffering around him. There's one problem: it never happened. This narrative has been debunked by historians who have meticulously studied the events of that fateful week. For starters, fiddles didn't even exist in ancient Rome. The violin, as we know it, wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. Nero's instrument of choice was the lyre, a stringed instrument popular in ancient Greek and Roman culture. Moreover, contemporary accounts suggest that Nero was out of town when the fire broke out. He was reportedly at his villa in Antium, a coastal town about 35 miles from the capital. This distance makes it highly unlikely that he was present in Rome during the fire. While not known for his empathy, Nero did return to Rome to organize relief efforts, using his own funds to help the displaced and oversee the city's reconstruction. Even if politically motivated, his actions were crucial in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. The story of Nero fiddling while Rome burned is a fabrication, a product of propaganda and historical gossip, most likely spread by his political enemies to tarnish his reputation. It's a case study in how history is often written by the victors, and how even emperors are not immune to historical slander. The truth, as always, is far more complex and nuanced than the myth that survives. Thanksgiving, a time for family, food, and heartwarming tales of the first Thanksgiving feast. But the real story of Thanksgiving is far more complex and less rosy than elementary school plays and holiday specials would have us believe. The 1621 Thanksgiving feast did happen, but it wasn't the celebration of love and harmony often depicted in popular culture. The Wampanoag, the Native American tribe present at the feast, weren't invited in the traditional sense. They showed up at the Plymouth colony after hearing the Pilgrims' guns firing during a hunt. The feast itself was less about celebrating a bountiful harvest and more about solidifying a strategic alliance. The Thanksgiving myth, with its emphasis on unity and cooperation, ignores the darker aspects of this history. Our next historical myth takes us to 17th century Salem, Massachusetts, a place synonymous with witch hunts. We've all heard the stories of innocent people accused of witchcraft, subjected to trials, and ultimately burned at the stake. The Salem witch trials remain a dark chapter in American history, but the burning part, that's where the myth comes in. Contrary to popular belief, no one accused of witchcraft in Salem was burned at the stake. The 19 men and women executed for witchcraft in Salem were hanged, not burned. The image of witches burning is a powerful one, and it's easy to see how it became conflated with the events in Salem. While no one was burned in Salem, the trials themselves were tragic and unjust. Let's talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, the French military leader and emperor who conquered much of Europe in the early 19th century. Known for his brilliant military tactics and ambitious campaigns, Napoleon's influence reshaped the map of Europe and left a lasting legacy. He was a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader, and, if you believe the popular narrative, a short man. This perception has persisted for centuries, often overshadowing his remarkable achievements. But is it true? Not really. The idea that Napoleon was unusually short is more myth than fact, a misconception perpetuated over time. While not a giant, Napoleon wasn't particularly short either. In fact, his height was about average for men of his time. He stood at about 5 feet 6 inches, 168 centimeters, which was the average height for a Frenchman at the time. Average heights were generally shorter back then than they are today. The British, eager to diminish their enemy, propagated the rumors about his height, often depicting him as much shorter than he actually was. These depictions were part of a larger strategy to belittle and mock him. The myth of Napoleon's height serves as a reminder that history is often as much about perception as it is about reality. Our understanding of historical figures can be shaped by propaganda and misinformation. A few inches, exaggerated and exploited for political purposes, can become a defining characteristic, shaping how we view a historical figure for centuries to come. It's a cautionary tale about the power of narratives and the importance of questioning what we think we know about the past. Our final historical myth takes us to the so-called Dark Ages, a time when, according to popular belief, people believed the Earth was flat. This era is often portrayed as a time of ignorance and superstition, devoid of scientific knowledge. You know the story. Medieval people, gripped by superstition and ignorance, were convinced that sailing too far in one direction would lead them to fall off the edge of the world. This narrative has been perpetuated in countless books, movies, and even some educational materials. There's just one problem with this story: it's completely false. The truth is far more interesting and complex. The idea that medieval people believed in a flat Earth is a myth, a misconception that emerged in the 19th century. It was during this time that writers and historians began propagating this falsehood to highlight the advancements of modern science. In reality, educated people in the Middle Ages knew that the Earth was a sphere. This knowledge wasn't lost, but rather further developed by scholars of the time. The ancient Greeks had already figured out that the Earth was round through observations of the stars, the way ships disappear, hull first over the horizon, and the circular shadow of the Earth during lunar eclipses. These observations were well documented and widely accepted among educated individuals. This knowledge was preserved and disseminated by scholars throughout the Middle Ages. Medieval universities and libraries played a crucial role in maintaining and spreading this understanding. The flat Earth myth allows us to distance ourselves from the supposed backwardness of the past and revel in our modern scientific worldview. However, it's important to recognize the continuity of knowledge and the contributions medieval scholars made to our current understanding of the world. So that concludes our exploration of 7 historical myths. From a president chopping down a cherry tree to an emperor fiddling while his city burned, we've seen how easily facts can be distorted, exaggerated, and even completely fabricated. So, the next time you hear a historical anecdote that sounds too good to be true, dig a little deeper, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge the accepted narrative. You might be surprised at what you discover. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, share it around, and subscribe for more fascinating historical insights. See you next time.